sure I was all ready because I'm not a morning person, but I'm very, I got myself ready. Got the energy drink next to me.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm impressed with all the game students in St. Louis who woke up at 10 a.m. to see.
Yeah.
Give you guys a round of applause for doing that. That is not easy as a game design student.
No. This job is the only reason I actually get up in the morning. I wouldn't be up any time past or before like 11 in the morning if it was anything else.
Indeed, we are creatures of the night. So when Emmett and I worked together in video game production, we had finished class at 8, and then I'd get a report at 5 a.m. the next morning, and Emmett would be like, look, I finished this entire level 2 and it's all modeled and textured. Like classic Emmett.
Oh man. And in the game jam too, we were up. I think I was up probably until 6 or something in the morning getting stuff done for the game jam.
Yeah, we didn't sleep, but it was worth it. We had a good project.
It was very fun.
Perfect. Okay, well, I'm going to get started, everybody. I think I know most of you here. In case I don't know you, I'm Matthew Burton, professor and co-facilitator of the game design program at Webster University. And as most of you know, in St. Louis, we have a top-notch game design program. And as you also know, we have campuses all around the world, including Geneva. So we are now spinning up a game design minor and program here in Geneva. And we have a few goals with this. Number one, we want to offer classes in both campuses so students from Geneva can attend St. Louis, pursue their game design minor there. Vice versa for St. Louis, students can come to Geneva, take our classes here. We also want to build a bridge between our communities. So I think there's a lot of cool potential for us to work together. And actually, we have another design discussion after this meeting specifically about what that means. So yeah, we're building some really cool things around the game design program. I'm currently working with Francesco Visconti, who runs the media communications program here in Geneva. So Francesco, would you like to say a few words?
Well, the interesting thing is that my Bluetooth is not working today. So, maybe it's the color of my beard and my hair. So I am the older guy here, so I feel a little bit outdated. But anyways, yeah, the reason why I'm here is also to support the program. I'm very happy that Matthew managed to come to Geneva, and very happy that he managed to invite all these wonderful people like Emmett here. Thank you for being here with us. And yes, it is, everything started with the idea that we wanted to develop a gaming and design program in Geneva. And I thought that Matt will be the right person to support that. So I'm very happy about this. And I'm going to be supportive and so if anyone in Geneva or in St. Louis is interested in understanding how the program works, you can ask me or Matt, and we'll be happy to help you. So I'm going to stop here and let the people know about what they're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Francesco.
You're welcome.
Like Francesco was mentioning, there's a lot of great learning opportunities and just fun things to do if you're going to study abroad. One thing with the idea of, you guys know my game and app design in Japan class where we build a mobile app and translate it to Japanese. We could do the same thing like that, but we translate the app to French, German, Spanish. We come to Geneva and we learn how to make our app better and iterate based on feedback. So some cool opportunities in the future. So stay tuned for that. But now I'm going to kind of pivot to Emmett. So Emmett and I worked together in the Global Game Jam course, video game production, and everything Emmett did was just top-notch, awesome, extremely impressive. Emmett now works with Mob Entertainment as a 3D artist. So Emmett is going to discuss his journey working with Mob, show off some of his work, and then give some tips for us newbies like me in how to get started with 3D modeling. So Emmett, thank you so much for spending your time with us. I will turn it over to you, and yeah, we'll let you get started.
All right, thank you. I will go ahead and get my presentation up. So I'm very happy I could attend this because if there's anyone who knows being new to a game program, I would definitely be that person. When I started off at Webster, I had very, very, very little game program experience. In fact, very little 3D experience. So I know how it feels to go into something new and like kind of wanting to learn stuff. But, you know, ultimately coming out very glad I did because I ended up learning a whole bunch of stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's see here. All right, is it up? Okay, awesome.
We can see it.
So thank you for having me. I'm very excited to talk. First of all, who am I? You've heard a few times now. My name is Emmett Mitchell. That is me in the bottom left corner there. This is me with the team. This was for our 1 million subscriber little special. So I've had a lot of fun experiences at Mob, and I think I can't really say anything other than Webster is the only reason I'm here. I'm very happy I went to Webster. It has changed my life. The game program, especially in just a few classes, changed the entire outlook on how I wanted to spend my life and what career I wanted to do. Currently, I am enrolled in Webster. I've still got one more semester. I'll be graduating in spring. And as Matt said, I am currently a 3D artist for Mob Entertainment. I've been working here for just a few days under 6 months now, so that's half a year, and I have nothing but positive experiences to say about it. So as I mentioned, I started off Webster and I'm continuing at Webster as an animation major. I've told many people I am the least animation major you'll probably ever meet in your entire life. I did start in Webster with very little 3D experience. In fact, I think the only thing 3D I had done before going to Webster was a random animation with a creeper when I was like 8 years old with a super retro copy of 3ds Max that totally, I didn't get for free from my dad. So when I started off, I actually wanted to go into the concept art industry. And that did not last very long because I realized how hard and how time consuming typical animation was. I did not vibe with the 2D animation classes. I didn't really vibe with much of that at all. And eventually my focus started to pivot when a friend and I were talking about Gundam and going into like fan animations for Gundam because him and I watched just an ungodly amount of it. And so I went to YouTube and I started searching up like, how do you do 3D stuff? How do you animate? And eventually I found probably my favorite software of all time, never will change. And that was Blender. And this was my very first model. By my own standards now, it's not very good. As you can see, I didn't even know how to turn on smooth shading at the time. So the one on the left was a original concept. This was after, I believe, probably about a month or two of just watching YouTube tutorials and figuring out how to take the training wheels off. So this is my very first foray into that. So after that, I realized, how much I liked this side of animation rather than the 2D side of animation. So I went ahead and I talked to Chris Zagavac, who is my advisor, about what sort of programs I could go into that would capitalize on 3D. And I was very, very pleased to find out that Webster actually had a lot of stuff like that. So at this point, I had taken about probably every single 3D class, give or take maybe one or two because of scheduling reasons. And at this point, I had created many, many cool things. A few of these are examples of what I had created in class. Everything you see here is either a class project or using methods that I had learned in class. And all of these, they only use 3 programs. That is Blender, ZBrush, and Substance Painter. Some of these were created a little earlier in my adventure. Some of these were created a little bit later. My very favorite class that I might actually end up taking again next semester for an additional credit is 3D character sculpting. If you find that the typical 3D modeling isn't really your deal, you just kind of want to make something really cool, but not have to worry about how well it works in a game or like the poly count or the topology, 3D character sculpting is probably where you're going to find a lot of enjoyment. All you have to do is actually just make the sculpt. Everything else was optional. I didn't have to texture or like do anything else with that. I just wanted to do that on my own time. So if you want to make something really cool without worrying about the logistics, I highly suggest you take 3D character sculpting. But what I actually think is most interesting about my time in the animation program of Webster isn't actually the 3D classes. Rather, it's how I use my knowledge in 3D outside of classes that have nothing to do with 3D. So what I'm talking about is Webster's animation program has a ridiculous amount of classes. They have like character design, they have voice acting, storyboarding, 2D animation, 3D animation, basically anything you could ever possibly want as an animator is there at Webster. And there's a lot of different skills that go into that. Well, as I had mentioned previously, I didn't really vibe with the 2D part of animation. So I wanted to find any way I possibly could to incorporate my passion for 3D into my 2D art. So anyways, I started modeling. And then I actually created a lot of very cool things. For example, these 4 renders actually have nothing to do with animation, or I should say the actual art of animating. They are storyboards for a voice acting class. What I very much enjoyed from all of the classes I took, all of the professors, they really wanted students to approach assignments from what they believe is the most effective skill set they have. For me, my most effective skill set at the time was 3D animation. And so this isn't actually the first time I did it. I did it for every single assignment in that class. And I created many very cool things that I have on my portfolio. And I didn't have to do this, but I'm very glad I did, because every time I did an assignment like this and I went the extra mile and included skills that I wanted to improve, I got a little bit better. And if I did not do this, I don't think I would have progressed in the 3D program nearly as fast as I did. Showing these specific examples, I really wanted to have a lesson be able to be taken from this. If there's something you like to do and there's something you want to get really good at, I promise you the best possible way to do that is find ways to incorporate that into your daily life, and find ways you can kind of take something that you might not really want to do, might not be fun, and find ways to incorporate your passions into that. And don't be afraid to do something differently just because it's a little bit different from what everyone else is doing. For example, like I said, in my voice acting class, everyone was very, very skilled at drawing. I was not. So I was the only person out of my entire time at Webster who did stuff like this. And at first I was a little embarrassed because I'm like, oh gosh, are they going to think I'm like trying to be a tryhard or something? And, you know, I still had that feeling my first few semesters, but eventually I actually kind of got used to it. So what I'm trying to say here is just try to do everything you can to just keep sharpening your knife, and eventually you'll just keep getting better and better. So eventually I had taken all of the classes that were basically required of me for animation, and I was on to figuring out electives and stuff like that. And I'm not gonna lie, from someone who doesn't vibe from 2D animation, a lot of the classes I saw didn't really interest me. So I talked to Christopher Sagaback to see if there was any other possible ways I could look into expanding my skill set without having to actually do things that I didn't find particularly interesting. And he recommended that I look into the game program. And at first I was kind of worried, because when I went into Webster, I had no idea of anything that went into game design. But I thought, you know, I wanted to go into game design as a concept artist at first, so I might as well give it a shot. So we looked at what we had, and he actually recommended me the Global Game Jam. It wasn't actually even a full class. It was a single weekend of the entire semester. And I went ahead and I accepted that, and I added that on. And even though it was only like, I think 2 or 3 days out of an entire semester, I knew literally nobody in the room. I didn't even know Matt at this point. You know, everybody was strange and new to me, and I felt very out of place. I went ahead and I did it, but those 2 days changed basically my entire life. So we went ahead and we made this game called Zombies Ate My Homework. The theme, I can't remember exactly what it was. Do you remember what it was, Matt?
It was Lost and Found.
Yes, Lost and Found. So we had to come up with a concept for Lost and Found, which eventually we came up with this almost Space Invaders type game where you were a student in a classroom and you had to shoot zombies with the random stuff you found from the Lost and Found. So here's some screenshots from the game. So my role in this, it was a little bit strange. At first, I was primarily on the environment. So in Photoshop, I drew up a whole bunch of stuff. The desks, the floor, all of that stuff are all individual assets that I eventually put together in a layout that the game artist could use. But eventually, I actually had my hand in basically every kind of area just because we needed some extra help here and there. So eventually, by the end of it, I believe I was environment design. I had some UI in there. I helped the character animator because we needed to get that done really fast. And I've done some prop design for the game as well. So that was a very fun experience. I think I had the most fun in 2 single days than I did in my 2 years of like college in general up until that point. And it still remains like one of my top 3 moments of my entire student career. If I was able to do it again, I absolutely would. But this actually isn't my favorite thing that I did in the game design program. That will be coming up in a few slides. But after this, I kind of realized like, oh my gosh, you know, I feel really at home with these people. I knew nothing about them until a few days ago, but now that I was able to talk to them, I was able to relate to them and have a better time with this group of people than I did with like any of the animation people. You know, sorry to the animators, you know, I just couldn't vibe with it. So I did try to continue my work in games after that. So it was kind of a little bit of a random period where anything went. I took an alternate reality class. I think that was it was another special topic. So it was a very short class. It was, I think, either a week or a week and a half or something like that of an entire semester. It was really fun. That's the top left. I learned how to project stuff onto barcodes. That's really fun. I do try and use that where I can. I have some plans that'll be really fun for that. As well as that, I actually went and helped some of my friends make some random game projects completely unrelated to Webster. These two screenshots you see on the right are actually a escape room idea we never finished that was going to be at an optometrist. I think that's what they're called. So that was kind of biding my time until I could get my foot a little bit more into the games program officially at Webster. And eventually I talked to Christopher Sagaback, who recommended I do video game production. And that was probably the best possible decision I ever could have made at Webster. Video game production is a class where you go and you spend an entire semester just creating a game with a group of students. And I actually ended up submitting an idea. At the beginning of the semester, you could submit an idea for the game you wanted to produce. And, based on votes, you would either go on to the creative director role and create that game with a group of students, or you would join another group under the command of the creative director and make their game. So I actually did submit one, and I got lucky and I squeezed through. And that is where probably the culmination of everything I've learned at Webster came into play, and that is a game called Gravity. I wouldn't really call it a game. I'd call it a polished technical demo, mainly because we only had a semester and we couldn't finish it all the way. But Gravity is basically everything I've learned at Webster and everything that I find great about the animation program and the game program wrapped into one experience. Gravity is a puzzle game. It is a 3D puzzle game similar to Portal, where you control a gravity gun, kind of like Gary's Mod or Half-Life, and you solve puzzles using objects that have no gravity. So I was the creative director as well as the primary 3D artist on Gravity. One challenge I had on the team was I was the only one that at that point had like a little bit more of an advanced understanding of 3D. So I did almost all of the 3D models. Let's see here. So what I enjoyed about the game production class was it capitalized on not just the game program, but everything I had learned from an animation standpoint up until that point. So, for example, as an animator at Webster, you do have to take 3D modeling. It is a required course. And there you learn all of the fundamentals about, basic topology, UV unwrapping. You actually get to learn a little bit about texturing as well. So these 4 screenshots are actually the gray box levels, except for the one on the bottom right. That's actually a sketch that we made really early of the level we wanted in the game. And using everything I had learned from the games program as well as the animation program, we were able to turn these very basic ideas into very, very pretty, very visually appealing levels for the game. So Gravity is probably what I would give my most reasoning why I have my position at Mob right now. Matthew Burton, who is my favorite professor at Webster, he actually nominated me for this thing called the Webster Student Showcase, where the students that are selected by professors go and they kind of set up a reverse job fair where they get to show themselves off for potential employers. And Gravity was actually my ticket into there. So I had a little booth set up where I showed off Gravity as well as some of my other personal work. And that's where I met the fine folks at Mob Entertainment. At first, they were kind of intimidating because, they're a bunch of game devs just like us. So a lot of them weren't the most social people ever. So I was like, oh gosh, did I screw that up? And eventually they messaged me on LinkedIn saying like, hey, you interested in talking? And I was like, heck yeah, I am. So I went ahead and I talked to them. Got an internship there, and eventually that internship really quickly evolved into something that is eventually going to be, a multi-year project that I can't talk too much about right now, but I will go ahead and go on to Mob Entertainment. So as I had mentioned, this is my 6th month at Mob Entertainment, and I have nothing but positive experiences to say. I'm very happy that I, put as much work in at Webster as humanly possible to get here, because there's a lot of stuff that I learned at Webster that I use every single day here. My 2 main projects that I'm working on right now is a game called Project Playtime, which is a survival horror cooperative experience. They recently revealed that to the public. It'll be coming out December 2022. My second project that I'm actually more excited about, unfortunately, I can't really talk too much about because it's not super public, but I will say, this isn't going to be out for a while, but it's very cool. I'm very excited to have more stuff go public about that. But in my job here, I use 3 programs every single day, like without fail. And that would be Blender, that would be ZBrush, and that would be Substance Painter. So if you're a 3D artist and you're wanting to go into the games field, I promise you learning these 3 things are going to drastically improve your chances of getting a more solid position at a games industry. I will go ahead and address one thing really fast. There is the eternal debate whether or not Maya or Blender is the more professional alternative. From my experience, I had talked to not just mob people, but I have actually had conversations with people that are in other video game industries, as well as I've done plenty of research into job listings in not just like, the United States, but everywhere else, like in the UK. As the future goes on and Blender gets more kind of adapted by everyone else, you can actually get way further using Blender than you used to be able to without using Maya. Here at Mob Entertainment specifically, you do not have to have any Maya experience to actually get a job here. It is nice because there are some people here who use Maya, so being, connected in that way is nice. But if you don't like Maya like me and you learn Blender and you don't like learning like completely new stuff to do the exact same thing, it's okay to just use Blender. So I went ahead and I actually got permission to show one thing off from our upcoming game. Not too complicated, but I'm going to go ahead and showcase the pipeline. So for people who are curious what kind of goes on in the life of a everyday game dev, it's very simple. Every day is kind of following the same principles as a 3D artist. So everything starts off, you are given the concept art for an item. This is a concept art for a cosmetic that is going to be in our upcoming game this December. It is modeled after a hoodie that we actually sell on the merch store in real life. So I had plenty of, references to use, plenty of concept art, but you're going to receive art from someone who is, in a different area than you. This basically serves to get the primary details established. You are going to be able to see that from multiple angles. I couldn't fit the whole thing in because I needed to be able to show all 3 stages, but usually when you're given concept arts, it's going to be either a 3 or 4 point turnaround. That way, you know how to view something from every angle. And this is kind of the most important part that I feel was kind of hard to get used to going in from personal projects to a professional setting is the designs are final. You have to stick to these designs. When I would do personal projects in my free time, I still do this in my personal projects in my free time. If I make a mistake and I'm just like, I think this could work, or if I'm like, I'm gonna make this design choice. Unfortunately, when you're a 3D artist, you don't really have that luxury anymore. You have to stick to the concept art. So that is a challenge that you kind of face on the job. But once you kind of get over that and you get used to that, you go on to create high poly assets. High poly assets establish fine detail. You don't change the silhouette of the concept art, rather you build upon the concept art to create something that's very high fidelity. You don't have to worry about topology. You don't have to worry about quad count or anything like that. This is specifically just to make it look very good, because chances are, unless something's very simple, you're going to have to completely retopologize the asset to actually work inside game engines. From my experience, high poly assets are usually base modeled in Blender, and then I take them into ZBrush where you create very fine details. For example, when you do clothes, I don't know if anyone here has done experience modeling clothes before, but poly modeling folds individually is very, very stressful, very painful, because it's just not easy. So ZBrush is a tool that I would highly recommend you learn if you do plan on going into the 3D artist field. And after the high poly asset, you eventually end up with a final result that will eventually go into the game. So at this stage, you have to retopologize your high poly assets. It sucks, but it's necessary. This makes sure that not only is the stuff easy to work with in the engine, but it also makes sure that your game isn't super slow. Because if every model was, a million polygons, well, you can only have about 3 models in your scene before stuff starts to chug. So high poly details are baked down into a low poly asset as normal and height maps. When I first learned this, it was like the most magical experience of my entire life, knowing that I didn't actually have to remodel specific details and that you can just bake them onto a mesh, and it's just like, it's there, but it's not there. So if you're still new into your 3D journey and you haven't tried normal map baking, I highly recommend you do that. It's super nice. And we use Substance Painter and Substance Designer in the office. We use it every single day for texturing all of our assets. We are looking into using this thing called, I believe it's Mari, It is a program used to not only bake, but also texture. So if you are going into the 3D field, it is very likely going to be Substance Painter that you're using. Substance Painter is actually free to students, or it used to be, I think it still is. So if you're a student and you want to learn it, it's completely risk-free. And I promise you, if you are in 3D and you've tried using node-based texturing, it's way better than node-based. You don't have to worry about plugging all the spaghetti nodes into everything. It's actually a lot like Photoshop. So if any of you have experience with Photoshop and you want to learn how to texture 3D models, I definitely recommend learning Substance Painter. Next, I'm going to go ahead and go over some quick things. First, this is actually, I actually completely glossed over one quick thing. Once you are done with the model, it is going to be very imperative that you are good with feedback, because every single day we have dailies. Dailies actually establish, what we can do better, what we can change entirely if we need to about the products we're making. So every day after I am done with a project, I will take what I've gotten done with that day and I upload it to a site called SyncSketch. That is where everybody in the department can actually look over stuff and provide feedback. For bigger projects, we'll actually sit down in a conference room and just go over everything. So it's very imperative that you don't take stuff to heart, because I've had to change models entirely. Like, I actually just recently finished a cosmetic that I did months ago. It was one of the first ones, but because we established a new pipeline, they were like, let's change it entirely. So don't feel bad if you have to remodel things or change things, because it's not about you, it's just about the whole process. So next, I'm going to go over a few things. I'm going to go over what I would recommend for people who want to get into 3D modeling, and then I'm going to go over a few things that I wish I had known a little bit earlier in my career as a student. So if you're new to 3D modeling, here's a few tips I give you. Failure is a necessary step to success. Don't be afraid to completely remake parts of your model, if not the entire model. I can't tell you how many times I've done that before. I'm actually modeling, I'm doing a personal project that I'm trying to involve motion capture in. And I think I've remodeled the arm of that object probably 4 times now. So don't be afraid to not get it right on the first time. You rarely ever get things right on the first time. It's all about just learning from the process and getting better every single time. Next, I would say don't start overly complicated. It's very important to start with a very solid base. For example, when you go into character sculpting, you're going to learn a lot about the human anatomy. You're going to learn very quickly how uncanny things can look if you try to make something that isn't a base human look human. And what I mean by that is no amount of really high level detail can make a very fundamentally weak model look professional. So make sure, I know it's really tempting to start a model and then immediately want to get into the really cool, panel lining or the really cool musculature and all that stuff. It's very important to just start strong and make sure that base is there before you go into that. And also, I will say working low poly to high poly is also just going to make it a lot less frustrating on you. I know when it comes down to changing the topology, if you make a model and you subdivide it 3 times and all of a sudden you want to start, moving around edge loops, it's going to be infinitely harder when you have to, select the 1 out of your thousands of vertices when you could start off with just a few hundred instead. Next, I would say if you don't know where to start when you're making a model, for example, when I was in Gravity, there was a fire extinguisher that I was making, and I was like, I thought it'd be so easy. Fire extinguisher is just a tube with a handle on it. But then I did it and I'm like, I hate it. So I didn't know where to even begin. I would make it and then I'd trash it and then I'd start making the handle and then the tube and then I'd scrap it and then I'd start by the gauge and then the handle and the tube and then I'd scrap it. So if you don't know where to start, go to YouTube. I promise you that there are probably at least 3 or 4 people who have done the exact same thing you are trying to do. And they probably have a little bit more experience and they knew where to start. And I would not say copy what they do, because that's not good. You want to learn from the experience, but take notes of how they approach certain things. That way you can kind of assimilate that into your massive knowledge. That way, when you go and you start something in the future, you have a stronger, knowledge base to start from. And finally, I would say practice makes perfect. You've probably heard this 1,000 million times, but I promise you there is no sure statement. Practice does make perfect. Make room for 3D modeling every single day. It may be difficult at first. You might actually hate yourself at first. I know I did. There's nothing more frustrating than being bad at something you really want to be good at. But I promise you, once you kind of get over that initial hurdle of just I'm still learning, you'll be amazed at the things you can do and how fast you'll actually start improving. So even if it's just a few hours every day, do something. Even if it's something super simple, like you saw a pencil and you're like, I'm going to model that pencil just so I can, keep things fresh. A few things that I wish I learned earlier in my career as a student. Obviously, I was not a perfect student. There are plenty of things I would do differently if I could go back and redo the entire process over again. So first, I would say, don't keep putting off learning how to do that thing. I guarantee you, every single person, when I said that thing, something connected in your brain and you're like, oh yeah, I know that thing. So everyone has that thing that they don't like. For me, at first it was UV unwrapping, and then it was retopologizing. For me, when I was going into 3D modeling for a very long time, I would create very high poly assets that looked pretty okay. They were all right, but I couldn't do anything with them. I couldn't unwrap them, I couldn't animate them, and I couldn't even texture them because they were so high poly that they were just impossible to work with. And the only possible way around that was to retopologize them. You can't really unwrap something with 3 million polygons because one, your Blender will probably crash, or Maya crashes even more often. And two, you can't really place a seam when there are just, thousands of edges that you have to worry about. So, if you have that version of what you don't like to do, maybe it's UV unwrapping, maybe it's like learning how to mess with nodes or something like that. I promise, do it. You'll hate it, but once you learn how to do it, you're going to love yourself for it. Specifically for me with retopologizing, I learned how to do that. It took a while. It took me giving up and then having a software do it for me. Doing stuff by hand will always yield a better result. But after I learned how to do it, I felt great. I'm like, wow, this is great. The stuff I'm making, I can actually put into games now. And I end up using that skill basically every single day at this job. If I did not learn how to do that and I just kept putting it off, I would not even be able to get my models into the game because they'd be way too high poly for that. Because when you get into the game industry, the stuff you're going to make, it has to meet a lot of specific requirements. You're going to have to meet a poly count. You're going to have to meet a texture resolution. You're going to have to worry about how many sets of textures your UV shells fit into. So by learning that thing you hate, you're going to love yourself so much for it in the future. I would also say branch out. The more you're capable of, the more companies are going to want to hire you. So for me specifically, I started off basically everything Halo. I would draw Halo. I would model Halo. I would, think about Halo while I'm in my math class, how much I'd rather be playing it and creating stuff about Halo. But Halo only gets you so far. So if you have something you really love, that's not a bad thing. Having something you really love kind of helps build your character as an artist. But you do want to start branching out eventually because, not every company wants to make another Halo. Some people want to make Nintendo Pets or something. Maybe they're trying to make a fashion game or an architecture sort of building game. And unfortunately, Halo doesn't translate to that. So do expand your horizons as much as you humanly can. You might even find that you like some sort of stuff. Like for me, I hated modeling clothes at first. Clothes are like, you have to worry about folds literally everywhere. When your arm moves like this, you have folds that move around your chest. But eventually, after kind of learning how clothes work, I actually kind of like it. It's kind of fun. So do that as much as you can, because I promise companies are going to like you for that. Next, I would say don't be afraid to step outside of your comfort zone. You never know what you're actually going to end up being very good at. I would not have even gotten this job at all if I never decided to start animating stuff just for fun and ended up, really liking that. And that doesn't just go for what you actually want to do. Like, it doesn't have to be an entire career choice. It can be something as simple as, I want to learn this software, or like, I want to learn a new method of doing something. For example, when I first learned Substance Painter, it was something that was just completely new to me, but I wanted to get better at one specific part of the process. So when I stepped outside of my comfort zone and I did something different, I grew from that and I learned from that. And it's something I use every single day at my job. And lastly, I would say this is very, very important, and I'm still kind of suffering from this. Stay organized. I can't tell you how important this is. When you're working with a team, you are going to be required to use very specific naming structures, as well as, softwares. For me, I use Dropbox, but I also use this thing called Prism and Perforce. All three of these are for organizing files. Each one does it in their own way. And each one requires that we organize our files in a specific way so that the software doesn't get confused and break. So if you have 100 items in your scene and you give it to your person who's going to rig your model, and they are looking through 100 different cubes, cube 001, cube 002. They're going to get very annoyed at you very quickly by not organizing your stuff. And when you come from an entire, college career of being super unorganized, and then you're thrown into it, it's like, by the way, I want this to be named this to be named this. You're going to have to make sure that these are included with this. It's kind of jarring. So the earlier you get used to following very strict, file organizing methods or naming conventions, the better off you're going to be. That's, I believe, all I really have. So if anyone has any questions about the experience or, kind of tips or cool hacks they want to know, feel free to ask and I will give my best answer. Okay. It's also completely okay if you don't. I know it's very awkward to like talk over Zoom.
Yeah, don't be afraid, everybody. Remember that thing, you can overcome it. If that thing is on Zoom, now's your chance to overcome it. But that's actually one of my big takeaways from this lecture, I'll call it, Emmett, that that thing always, I wish I would have learned that earlier, that, that thing was 3D game development. I stuck with 2D for so long. It's like, 3D looks kind of tough, right? It's kind of scary. But once I dove into it, it's like, oh, okay, it's not so bad. And it kind of snowballed into me learning augmented reality and virtual reality. So it is something I wish I would have done sooner. I do have a question.
Sure.
Oh, another big takeaway that I love that you said was how to incorporate things that you love into things you don't. That's a really, really cool creative solution to a lot of problems I think a lot of people have, because what you do has to be fun. That's the only way to get really good at it. And once you get good at something, people pay you for it. Hence, your situation.
Yeah, I would say my entire animation experience in the animation program at Webster would have been vastly different if the professors would have said, you can't do that. You have to do it this way. You have to use this program. You have to draw it. I probably wouldn't even be here because I would have been like, I hate this. I don't even enjoy it. So it's very important to do everything you can to make what you do enjoyable, because if you don't enjoy it, the product you make isn't going to be worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. I do have one question, and sure. I know you spoke about when you started off, you want to do concept design, and now we have all these tools, artificial intelligence, concept design tools, Midjourney and DALL-E to be specific. Do you guys use those tools within Mob Entertainment?
That's actually a really good question, because I know AI art is a really hot, button topic in the world of game design, because no one wants to feel like they're being replaced by a machine. I would say my personal opinion is nothing will be able to replace the creativity that comes from the mind of a person. But I would say there is actually really useful tools for stuff like that. Midjourney specifically, we actually have used Midjourney in production of a project that I can't talk too much about. When you have an artist who is very busy with other projects and they might not have the time to be able to make 5 iterations of a really, really big set piece that we need kind of like now to be able to start producing it, that's where things like Midjourney can be very useful. We actually used it to create this very cool set piece of this project we're working on. It's not the final design by any means, however, it was enough to actually get that ball rolling, that we gave that to the artist that was too busy to start from scratch, and they were like, what, yeah, we can work with this. So they used that Midjourney concept and kind of roughed out the edges, kind of took away some of that computerized, math formula to it, to turn that concept into something that was a mixture between AI generated and human generated. So yes, stuff like that definitely has its place in the games industry.
Perfect. Yeah, I think it's a really good tool to spark ideas, and then you can use that as a reference for your own human brain. And actually, Zach Ridings, who's here, Zach and I worked on a project for a client. We actually used Midjourney to make the background for it. So there's a lot of cool uses for it. If you guys haven't used Midjourney or DALL-E, I posted them in chat. If you just Google search them, it's really fun. You can just type in a few words like Vaporwave Ninja, and it will just spit out art that fits those themes. It's a lot of fun to use. And then I have one other question. What was it? Yeah. Oh, you know what? That was it. That was all my questions. I'll quit hogging the screen. But yeah, any other questions from the audience?
Hi. I was just wondering, so I know you said you did mainly 3D modeling, but I was wondering if you had any recommendations for like Blender, Grease Pencil, like that kind of thing for YouTube tutorials.
So Grease Pencil, I have actually used Grease Pencil in one of my animation classes. I'm trying to remember very specifically. I'm trying to remember his name. His I'm very basically the only name I recognize and remember from my time searching like YouTube tutorials is like Blender Guru and Ducky 3D. His icon is a cat, a little cartoon cat. He does a lot of stuff with Grease Pencil, and he was actually new to Grease Pencil, so he's a very good person to approach from a kind of newbie perspective. I would actually recommend experimenting with Grease Pencil as well, just like in your free time. I remember when I did my animation program with Grease Pencil, I knew very little about it. And a lot of it was just kind of playing around to see how it worked and just kind of figuring out some things for myself and then using that to go to tutorials and figure out how to expand upon that. So specific names, I don't remember exactly. I just know he's a yellow cat and he does a lot of very cool stuff with Grease Pencil, with both like completely 2D as well as like 2D animation and 3D backgrounds.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. So I saw Kaviz raised his hand. Kaviz, do you have a mic?
Yeah.
You want to ask your question?
Hi. I wanted to ask, how would you describe your artistic style? You also mentioned Halo, and I was wondering if that was one of the games that shaped your style in a way, or if it was other things as well.
Absolutely. So I could go on, an entire lecture about Halo at this point. It's basically the piece of media that shaped my young childhood. I would say it's gotten to the point to where it's actually kind of integrated into my style to the point to where if I make anything even slightly like, robotic or sci-fi, they'll be like, you can see the Halo in that. So Halo is like probably the biggest contributor to when I formed my style, incorporating stuff from Halo into that. But there's also some other stuff. Warframe is also a game I play very religiously. It's a game that I believe has a very unique art style. It's very biomechanical, and I try to incorporate stuff like that as well. But what I think is probably the most useful in creating your own art style is probably trying to incorporate as much as you can from as many different sources as you can, because if you rely too much, like I know for me specifically, when I started off doing 3D modeling, I did mainly do Halo stuff, and it was very cool, but I didn't think it benefited me as much from trying to do stuff that was completely original to my art style. So if I were to recommend, if you're trying to kind of come into your own art style, try to think of ways you can incorporate stuff that actually has nothing to do with what you want to do, and it's going to create a sort of unique product. So for example, if you want to do something sci-fi, see if there's ways you can incorporate like maybe medieval fantasy into that, and you have this hybrid that all of a sudden has something completely unique that a lot of the other sci-fi pieces that are out on ArtStation don't have. Though for your specific question, yeah, Halo is basically 90% of like the inspiration for my stuff when I first started out.
Thank you.
Nice. Thanks, Kaviz. Okay, so we've got a few hands up, quite a bit. So I'm just going to go down this list and call you guys out. So Joel, we'll take the question from Joel first.
Hi, yes. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah, so my question to Emmett is, how do you deal with like perfectionism? Because you were saying you've had to redo models several times. Like when do you kind of realize this is good enough?
That's actually such a good question, because like perfectionism it's not just like a 3D modeling thing. If you're an artist in any field, especially in like the game and animation industry, I'm sure you also probably deal with your own kind of level of perfectionism. For me, I would say I know a model's done when I stare at it and I know there's something that could be better, but I don't know what it is. So I'll sit back and I'll stare at it. I'll look at something from like 30 different angles. And if there isn't one specific thing that I know just I could not fix, for example, the one I'm working on now, that personal project, the arm I remodeled like 4 times, I knew it was done because I would say if I remodeled that, it wouldn't look very different. It would just maybe have one thing that would be different. So once you start getting to the point to where the benefits aren't outweighed by the effort used to actually make it, I would say it's done, because you could spend your entire life trying to make something perfect, but eventually you're going to get to that point to where the effort required to get to that point just isn't really worth that tiny bit of extra polish. So I would say that's the point where I would just completely, stop, move on. After that, maybe I'll start feeling a little bit better afterwards. So that's probably how I would deal with perfectionism. And I still deal with it every single day. And especially once you start working for a company that expects very good things from you and you're like, oh my gosh, are they going to like this? It starts getting even worse. But That's my general take on that.
I think your real take, Emmett, is just make it perfect.
Yeah, if it's not perfect your first time, never try again. That's a joke, of course. Don't do that.
Awesome. Good question, Joel. Thank you. All right, let's go down the list. Mateo.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yep, all good.
Perfect. I was just wondering how you found and what was your experience going from university to a career and a company?
So this is actually a very good question because I don't feel like there is a solid answer for this. So I know there's a lot of people I've talked to in my time that think college is kind of like, oh, it's a scam, you're just going into debt. Well, I would say university, it is ultimately what you make it. So my recommendation when you're going from that transitional period from university to a career, do every single possible thing you can in the university that would transfer over into a career. Basically treat your university as a career, if that makes sense. So when I was in the game program, I know there was, when I was making Gravity, there was a little bit of internal heat because some people weren't taking it as seriously as others. And, that kind of brought the project down at certain points. And I kind of had to start, lighting fires saying, you got to get this done. If you treat your time in university like you are at a job, like you're being paid for it, I feel like you're going to set yourself up for when you actually get into the job, like far better than someone who's only there to get the assignment done, get a B on it, maybe, they just want that grade and they want that degree. So if you are wanting to go into a career, the best possible way you can set yourself up is just treat your life like it is the career. So when you go into it, it's like most of that stuff is going to transfer over anyways. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that was a really good answer. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
That was excellent. Yeah, thanks for the question, Mateo. Thanks for the answer, Emmett. Let's keep going down the list. Theodore, I'll come back to you, but Rebecca has a question.
Hello, do you hear me right?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Awesome. So my question is more when it comes to like the 3D modeling realm, since I come from a background of both like computer science, so I got programming, and then I have the art. And the cool thing about those two fields, like with art, if you don't really know how you want to do something, you can just go and study other art directly. And then with coding, you just go and look at other people's code that they made available.
Yeah.
A struggle I feel like I have, especially when it comes to modeling and like topology, like making sure your topology is good, is the only way to see how people in like the field, like professionals, are doing this thing. Like one example for me, this is going to sound silly to people who aren't familiar with this kind of struggle. I couldn't figure out how to model like butts just so that they deformed correctly, right? Yep. So because that's a problem. Like if you don't model it with enough topology, like you'll just get a big like angle in there. But how would you describe like going about finding professional examples without, going into games and ripping the models just to look at their topology?
Yeah, no way. I actually have a really good answer for this. I use it all the time. When it comes to professional level stuff, there's kind of two avenues you can take. There's one that's really professional, and then there's one that kind of gives you varying results. So for like really professional stuff, I will actually go to ArtStation. I have a list of artists that work in projects like Halo, Gears of War. I might have to relocate here in a few seconds. My computer's getting low on battery, and unfortunately, the outlet's all the way over there, but I'll get a little bit longer. So I have artists that work on Halo, Gears of War, stuff like that on my like followed list on ArtStation. And a lot of the time when you seek out these people who are, those artists who actually do that stuff, and they're not like the creative directors, they'll go as much into detail as they possibly can about the creation. So usually you'll find stuff like their finished model. They'll usually have their wireframe. They'll usually have their, high poly to low poly comparison. So ArtStation is a very, very good resource for stuff like that. And if you're looking for specific examples, for example, like you said, if you're wanting to learn how to do a butt, try looking for games that have butts in them. That sounds very weird, but like find an example of media that has that, and then see if you can go into the credits and find who did that, and then go to ArtStation and see if you can find them. Chances are they're going to be showing their stuff off in as much detail as possible. And if you want the less professional example that kind of gives you varying results, I would go to Sketchfab. Sketchfab is fantastic. You can go and you can find models like what you want to create, and then you can actually view them, in the web format, and turn on the inspector, and you can look at like the wireframe and see where they place their edge loops, where their pole vectors and stuff like that. I use Sketchfab basically every time I start something that I've never modeled before. Those would be the two I would recommend. And of course, you can always go to YouTube and see. YouTube is very kind of like hit or miss, sometimes you have someone who knows what they're doing, sometimes not. But I hope that helps a little bit.
It does. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Thanks, Beck. Okay, I'm going to keep going down the list. Michael, it looks like you have your hand raised, and I saw you also posted on chat. Are you available to speak?
Hi, sorry, yeah, I'm just at the train station right now, so
all
I'm
good.
scared that mid-speaking, a massive train's gonna go right by. So.
If so, I'll cover the rest.
Yeah, so my question was, I understood that like at least your main goal is to do like animation, model work, and things like that. But in terms of like model rigging in general, I have some experience, but I just can't work it the best way, or the way I wanted to move as intended. Do you have like any tips and tricks?
So for rigging is something that it is a process entirely in its own. I remember rigging was probably my least favorite part of learning how to do 3D, because it's so vastly different from actually modeling and texturing and stuff like that. If I had to recommend anything, if you're starting out learning stuff, I would of course recommend watching stuff on YouTube, but there are also some really good auto riggers that will kind of get the process started for you. So for example, when I'm rigging something, I'll usually start, and I don't want to like start from the ground up, of course. I will use either Mixamo or like Maya's, I can't remember what it's called, like Human Rig Maker or something like that. Blender even has one too. And that'll kind of like make a very decent base. And then I would empty all of the weights, and then I would kind of, separate some of the bone groups, and then I would kind of build on that. There is absolutely no shame in starting off with like an auto-generated base, and then just kind of using that as a way to kind of build off on top of that. So that would be what I'd recommend for the software side of things. For like, just in general, I would say, don't be afraid to just kind of like try different things in the 3D like field specifically. You're going to actually kind of go out of the box sometimes and accomplish things in ways that you wouldn't actually even expect. For example, we're working on a cinematic right now for one of our upcoming projects, and it involves one of the characters' arms to be completely separated from their body, and you can't view anything else. Well, instead of like making an arm rig and do that all on its own, the character is out of the camera and the bones are just moved all the way. So his arm is like stretched across the entire scene. It looks insane if you look at it from literally any other view, but from that specific camera angle, it looks exactly how you need it to. So don't be afraid to kind of think of like unorthodox ways of doing stuff if it gets you a result that you like. I hope that helps, because rigging unfortunately isn't my like wheelhouse. We have two people who do all the rigging here that I can't even begin to know how they do the stuff they do. It's insane. So yeah, I understand the pain with rigging, but I hope that helps at least a little bit.
It does. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, I want to show one of the tools Emmett was just talking about, Mixamo. Here, Emmett, I'm going to grab the screen from you really quick, but this is rigging for non-riggers. So if I go to mixamo.com, I can sign in with my account, and you'll see there's two sections here. There's characters and animations. So you can pick any character you want from here. There's a huge library of free character models, and you can sculpt over these or just use them. So if you don't want to touch, any sort of sculpting tool, you can just pick something here. Like I'll pick Olivia. We'll use Olivia. And then you can simply go to the animations tab and then find any sort of animation. They have a lot here. So we could do sitting and laughing. And what's nice about this is that it maps really, really well with any game editor. So Unity Game Engine, Unreal Game Engine, you can download the FBX, so the 3D model. the animation file that goes with it, and then tie it all together in your game. So it's a really fast, good looking way to put 3D rigged humanoid characters into your game. So another cool tool that we use at another reality studio, which Zach could also speak to, we use this tool called Ready Player Me, and you can essentially create 3D avatars. So you can make yourself. I'm going to continue without a photo. And this works really, really well with Mixamo. So you can create an avatar, give it clothes, you know, adjust the facial features, give it a beard, sunglasses, anything you want, tie it in with Mixamo, and all the documentation is on Mixamo's website. It's actually pretty simple. You could do it in maybe 15 minutes or less. The first time I did it was kind of challenging, but now it's just streamlined. So I'm pretty confident anybody on this Zoom is capable of doing this too. So yeah, 2 very useful and free resources for you guys to use.
The best part about Mixamo, I would say, if you're looking for something more custom, you can actually take this rig and then export it into any software that you could do rigging in, and then you can actually change the weight painting. You can modify the skeleton. It's basically just like a free first pass, and you can just modify it in any way you want. So yeah, it's great.
Yeah. Let's see, what should we have in the background while we continue asking questions? We'll just do the boss laughing. Okay. All right. Let's see who we have next for questions. I saw there were a few hands up and now they're gone. Does anybody else have any final questions? No more? Okay, Emmett, thank you so much for your time. What you do is incredible, and we're all extremely proud of you. Thank you for spending your time and sharing your experience with Mob and all of your awesome work, and for all of your pro tips. That is honestly really invaluable. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was really cool. This was my first presentation, so sorry if I kind of got stumbled over my words a few times.
It was fantastic. I'd like to do a group picture. So if you guys are all being brave, could we all turn on our cameras and do a quick group pic? All right, we got a few brave souls. Look at that. All right. Okay, 10 more seconds to turn on your camera, and then we'll take the picture. Cool. And good questions, guys. Thank you for asking all those great questions. Okay, ready? All right, group picture in 10, 9, 8, 7, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Awesome. Cool. Thank you, guys. All right, how about one more round of applause for Emmett? Oh, you guys should have unmuted. It was just me clapping. Cool. Well, thank you again, Emmett. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. So good morning, everybody in St. Louis. Good night to everybody in Geneva. Thank you for your time, and I'll see you guys later. Thanks, Emmett.
Thank you, guys. Have a nice night, you guys.